All right, now we're moving on to some noise reduction. So we can close the deconvolution process here. And I'm going to remove, actually I'm going to leave the mask in place. I'm going to get rid of some of these previews because I don't need them anymore. And we're still working on the luminance data, if you recall. And instead of now working on the stars and galaxies like we did for deconvolution, I actually want the inverse of this. So I want to take the mask and invert it, where now I'm protecting the stars and galaxies, and I want to now smooth the background. So I'm going to hit Control K to hide the mask. It's still applied. It's just not visible to us. And I'll create a new preview just to see what the settings look like. Get optimal here. And I'm going to use this process here, multi-scale linear transform. Again, the icon that I clicked already has some of these settings already programmed in. But I'll go through them so that you can see what the settings are. You can see that I have 5 layers selected. These are the parameters that I have. If you want to change these more or less, they happen in this noise reduction section down here. You usually change the amount first. I don't really ever play with the iterations, and maybe the threshold you'll adjust occasionally, but in general, these are the settings that I use, and I typically only adjust the amount on a scale of 0 to 1. It does have a preview mode, which is nice, so I will go into preview mode, and it takes a little bit to calculate. And now you can remember I have that mask applied, so now we're working on the sky background. And this is what it looks like with the process applied. So if I turn this off, you can see that this is a lot noisier in the background sky. When I turn it back on, it's subtle, but it has smoothed that sky background. And I might actually try to even smooth it a little bit more. I think I might be able to get a little away with some. We'll see. But we got to be careful because we don't want to destroy any of the galaxy data as well. Even though I have a mask applied, remember there's a portion of that mask that is transitioning into the galaxies or the stars, and ever so slightly those are also smoothing the detail there. And so I got to be cautious not to destroy that. I'm going to go, this looks actually, and that doesn't look too bad. I'm going to create another preview in those 2 little galaxies because I would like to try to preserve as much as possible the detail in those, the little bit of detail that I have. So I want to make sure that I'm not destroying this structure that you can see here. So if I go to preview mode for that and blink it, and it doesn't appear as though I'm impacting that at all, which is great. What also is a little bit more evident here, a little bit more clear, is the effectiveness of my mask. It does look pretty good, I think. It's hard to detect where the mask starts and stops, which is the whole point of what I'm trying to shoot here for. Is make that so that that's not obvious. A lot of common mistakes I'll see is that people, when they mask their stars, they have really, really hard lines that are around the stars because their edges are not fuzzy and they're masked, and it's totally obvious where they masked, and it looks unnatural. So I'm trying to decide right now as I blink this whether or not I want to try to go a little bit more or not. One thing about this tool is you should read up on wavelets and how wavelets work. The background noise, the structures within this very, very small detail are often present in the lower layers. primarily level 1 on a scale of 1 pixel. And that's what the layers are. The scale here you see is structures that are of size 1 pixel, which is the background. 2 pixels, 4 pixels, 8 pixels, 16, etc. And you can add more layers if you want. It takes a little bit more processing time, but it'll further dissect this and give you a little bit more functionality on being able to exactly target the structures that you're trying to manipulate or enhance in your image. For me, I think 5 layers is adequate. Some of the other things you can do in this is to turn off layers. So if I just turn off the first layer, what does that do? So that does seem to smooth it, but it looks a little, I turned off that structure, so now all I see is the larger structures, which in itself is creating structures. I don't like that, so I'm going to put the level 1 back on. I'm just going to tweak these numbers. I'm going to pause the video, see if I can squeak any more softening of the background without destroying data, and then I'll come right back. Okay, so I've been playing around with some of the settings on the multi-scale linear transform and trying to find the best optimization of these settings to get some smoothing of the background. And I haven't really been able to eke out any more smoothness than what I was showing before. So this is before and this is after. The one good thing is that the mask is doing its job. It's not too harsh of a transition, so it's subtle to tell where we've masked and where we haven't, and it certainly is protecting the detail in, say, like this galaxy here. So when I blink that off and on, you can see that the background, all the little tiny structures are becoming smooth. But not so much that it looks fake or unnatural or plasticky, if you will. It's just a little bit of an enhancement in smoothness. So we're going to go with that. I'm going to close the preview. I'm going to go back to the main image and apply these settings to the complete image. And so that's a pretty quick process. You can see just did a little cleanup. I'm going to get rid of my previews. If I need more, I will add them later again. And that's really, the last step to refining the detail in the luminance. We have performed deconvolution, a little bit of sharpening of the stars, a little detail on the little galaxies here as much as possible, and then smooth the background. A lot of work for just a little bit of gain, but I think you'll see that it was worth it when we now add this luminance back into the color data. All right, so let's the next step is to permanently stretch both the luminance data and the RGB data. I don't recall if we did or not. I don't believe we did. So I'll go, yep, we just left off at color calibration. So this is still linear data. This luminance is still linear data. And we should now remove any masks before stretching. And now it is just a matter of taste, how much you want to stretch the luminance. The more you stretch, the more faintness of the galaxy glow, if you will come out, but you sacrifice introducing noise and also amplifying other minor imperfections in the background, etc. So it's a good balance. You have to find that right balance. So we're going to use a combination of screen transfer function and histogram transformation to do that permanent stretch on the luminance. I just took the screen transfer function with the linked or unlinked, it doesn't matter since this is black and white, as my starting point. Now this, to me, is too much stretch. It's starting to show some of the noisiness and ugliness in the background, so I'm going to tame that down just a little bit. So let's just zoom in here and look at any area in general, and I will manipulate the screen transfer function settings here to adjust accordingly. So I'm going to zoom in on the K channel here, and I'm not going to touch the black point. Black point seems to be okay right now, but I'm going to change the midpoint so that some of that noisiness in the background goes away or is disguised. And you see, the more you raise this, the more your detail or definition you're giving up in the galaxy. And so I don't want to kill that. I want to have a balance here. Sky background is not black. It should never be truly black. There is some brightness level even to the darkest skies. And so this is really up to the individual how bright they want to make this. So let me see what that looks like if I zoom out. It seems a little darker than I would want it. I think I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. Yeah, that seems pretty good to me. I will drag that over to histogram transformation and then turn off screen stretch and then permanently apply this stretch using histogram transformation. And so now this image has gone from linear to nonlinear data. If I select that image, RGBL, that's now what the histogram looks like for this image. I could probably even get away with raising the black point on this. So let me zoom in and just see what that does, as long as it doesn't kill too much. So yeah, I can probably get away. See, right there is when you start to clip data. And it gives you a percentage of clipping. Here, whether you're clipping the shadows, highlights, etc., you want to try to keep that to a minimum. So here I'm virtually clipping nothing. As I darken it, that number will start to climb, and you gotta find that right balance where you're not clipping too much. So that looks pretty good. If I turn that on and off, that was the original brightness, and that would be the raising the black point just a little bit. So I'm going to go with that. Close the preview, apply it, and reset the tool. And so that's what the histogram looks like now for this image. Pretty good. Now we have to permanently stretch the RGB data. Now, how we do this, you can do one of two ways, and I've had success with both of them. You can use histogram transformation like we just did and try to find the best balance of colors manually yourself using the nuclear as a starting point. Or you can use arcsine stretch, which has been a little bit more successful in really pulling out the colors of things, but it can also be dangerous because it can you can overdo it and have some funky looking colors, teals and greens and stuff that at least to me is not all that pleasing. So I'm going to try and do arcsine stretch very, very subtly and see if I can get something that I like. Otherwise, I will just use histogram transformation by itself to do that. To use arcsine stretch, one of the first things that you want to do is make sure that everything has the red, green, blue channels all have an equal weighting of 1. So you have to go into the RGB working space, change those to 1, and apply that to the image. That way it's not prioritizing any one channel over the other. And it didn't look like it did anything, but trust me, it did. And then let's try to use arcsine stretch here. It's still trying to learn this tool and perfect it. It is a pretty cool tool with some of the images. This one has been this image has been challenging to pull out color in a way that I like. And so let's turn off screen stretch and go into preview mode. And what I typically have read and try to do is you start with the stretch factor and you bring this up just until you start to see some of the detail that you want to stretch. And so I'm gonna raise this up pretty high. You can start to see that, wow, there's some colors coming out. I think this is probably too much stretching already, but it's a trial and error kind of thing, so we can try a couple things. I'm going to back this off to, let's just try 10 and see what that looks like, because there's a second step to this. So I will first apply, oops, I was still thinking. Close the preview mode, apply this to the image. In fact, hang on a second. I'm going to test this on a clone because I want to be able to compare. And then the second step is to raise the black point, which is very, very subtle, which is why it has a gross slider and then a fine tuning slider. And so you get this in the neighborhood with this upper one, and then the lower one is just a fine tune of that. And it can be very, very gradual. So I will raise this up. And so you can get out of hand really, really quick. Right there, I think, is when we started introducing strange artifacts. Maybe I'll even go a little bit lower. So I have no idea if this is going to look good. In fact, it's starting to put little weird artifacts on the stars themselves, which is what I don't like to do, because then you got to go around and clean that up. And so this is where this tool has been challenging for me, at least on this image. Okay, so I have been playing around with the arcsine stretch and did a little bit of trial and error while the video was paused. I spent quite a bit of time actually trying to work with the arcsine stretch to get it to produce something that I liked. And so let's go back to the original RGB image where we left off. If I load the History Explorer and I go back in time, one thing that I had forgotten to do before doing the arcsine stretch was smoothing of the background for the color data. So let me go back in time just to show you how I did that. If I apply a screen stretch, this is where we left off on the RGB data. Is we've done a background neutralization, color calibration, and we were just about to do a permanent stretch. But before that, I had realized that I forgot to do smoothing in the background. So what I did is I used our luminance mask that we created a while back. I tweaked it a little bit more to make the blacks a little bit blacker, and I applied that as a mask to our RGB image. So let me show you that. Just remove the mask that's there right now. So I took that mask, applied it, and made sure that it is working on the background and not the stars. So this is how it was applied. I need to invert that mask so that now it's protecting the galaxy and stars, and it's going to work on the darker areas here. So I'm going to press Control K again to hide that. It's still applied, it's just not visible to us. And then I used the same process that we used for smoothing the luminance data, MLT, multilinear transform, with these settings. I didn't change anything, and I literally applied that to the image. And when I did that, let me just zoom in here, you can still see that the background here is pixelated and has quite a bit of noise. But if I now fast forward in terms of what I applied here, you'll see that now the image is much more smooth in the background areas. So I snuck that in while the video was paused, and I just wanted to make sure that you saw that step. So didn't want to get too far ahead. So we have now applied convolution to the luminance data that we've been working on. We did some smoothing of the background, and we have permanently stretched the luminance data now. And I can show that in the Explorer, History Explorer here. We did deconvolution, MLT for smoothing, and now we have permanently stretched. So this is ready to recombine with the color data. The color data we left off, we still had to smooth the background and then permanently stretch it. And when I paused the video, I was trying to use ArcSine Stretch to get a good stretch of the color data, and ran into some issues to get a good result. So that's what I've been working on, and that's how these things go. It's a lot of trial and error, and eats up a lot of your time, or can if you get too caught up on it. So I think I found a decent result now of the ArcSine Stretch that gives a result that I can live with. I might still try just histogram transformation by itself on a separate video, but let me show you what I did. Right now I'm still, this is linear data. If I turn off screen stretch transformation, it's still just the dark data. I will stretch this. Let me stretch it with unlinked. And this is too much stretch, obviously. Would tone that down. But let me just show you what I did. So I applied 2 instances of ArcSine Stretch. The first one that I did is, again, this is with no masks applied, with screen stretch turned off, and I go into the preview mode, and I raised up the stretch factor until I got a result that looked like this. Usually I don't go this bright, but I think it ended up being a decent result. Notice here, though, however, in these really, really bright stars, I'm starting to introduce artifacts that are ugly, and that I will have to go back and correct. Anything that is the really, really bright stars are starting to get a little crazy on the cores, and they're getting blown out and really looking ugly stars. So there is going to have to be some repair going back to those to fix those. But I like the color. I like how it's amplifying the color of things and bringing that out. So I was happy with this. I applied this to the image by dragging the triangle onto it, and the result was this. Let me just fast forward now in the History Explorer. And so this is the result that we got. And then I applied a second round of ArcSine Stretch. And I did the same thing. I used the preview mode to further stretch it from here to here, just to brighten the image a little bit more. I raised that black point ever so slightly, just so it brightened things a little bit. And I was happy with that preview, so I dragged the triangle onto the picture and applied that. And again, the result is this, which is very similar to what our preview showed. So that our image is now stretched. The RGB is permanently stretched. Now the only thing left is we've been working on our luminance data separately that we deconvolved and smoothed, and we need to now take this luminance data and replace it in the RGB data with the luminance that's there. We extracted the luminance, worked on it, and now we need to put it back. And so we do that with the LRGB combination tool. I will only check luminance because that's the only channel that I wish to replace in the RGB image. I'm going to select the RGBL image, which is what we had been working on and deconvolving, etc. And then I'm going to apply this to the RGB image. And when you do that, it will replace the existing luminance data in the RGB data with the one that we manipulated. And the result is this. Now, the reason why I'm still not exactly crazy about this, it definitely has nice color, but it's still a little bit noisier than I would hope it to be. It's particularly for, the darkness of the skies that we had. Although you can see the color in the galaxies are coming through, which is kind of cool. So that's kind of the compromise. I'm happy with the color that's coming through. I'm a little unhappy with the level of noise that's still in the image. Now, that just may be a result because I only took 7 10-minute images for each channel. If I had twice that data, there might be a little bit more smoother background. And maybe if I get a chance to go back to that Portal 2 sky on a new moon weekend, I will try to gather more data before it's too late and it's too low to the horizon. Because this is a really cool field that shows a lot of galaxies. And right now it's a little bit noisier than I would like. In any case, we're going to move forward with this, and that's the stretching of the RGB data, stretching of the luminance data, and then recombining the luminance back into it. So I'm going to minimize my luminance because we're finished with that. This was just a clone that I was working off while the video was paused. Don't need him. Just keep him to the side. And we're going to keep moving forward now with our RGB data, our RGB image, as the single image that will continue to mature and refine now. So let's try to recap, check in on our process flow where we're at. Obviously, we did the pre-processing. We prepared for combination. We cropped the image, we did some linear fit, we extracted the background, and then we combined the red, green, blue images into a single image. We started doing some background neutralization, and at that point we split the image into its color data and its luminance data. And we paused on the color data and we moved into deconvolving or sharpening the luminance data, and then we applied noise reduction to the background of both the RGB image, the color data, and the luminance data, and then permanently stretched them to that state. Now, and then the last step obviously was we recombined the luminance and the RGB data together. And so now we're back to a single image. Now we're in the final stages. This is really where it gets, subjective and to the person that's processing what they feel they like, what sort of things they want to bring out in the image. It is a dark art, and you can go crazy, and this is really where it is it sucks a lot of time, or can, if you really want to play around with the settings. I will take you through this. It will apply some saturation, sharpening, maybe some further noise reduction. Just try to squeak out just a slightly better image, and hopefully get a final image here soon. So that would be the next video.